Okay, it's preparing to stream. Okay, it's preparing to stream. Welcome to the Weller Bookworks YouTube channel, everyone. We will begin in approximately 2 minutes at 2:05 with our conversation with Mary Dixie Carter and Aggie Blum Thompson about their books. We'll see you in just a moment. Hello again. I'm Catherine Weller with Weller Bookworks, and I am pleased to welcome you today for a wonderful conversation that we'll be hosting between Mary Dixie Carter, author of The Photographer, and Aggie Blum Thompson, author of the book Dirty Secrets. As you can tell from the titles, this is all going to be very intriguing and very interesting. I'm looking for some kind of lowdown here, so we'll hear all momentarily. To get us started, I would like to let you know that I have posted links for each of the books in the chat boxes in YouTube. Please remember that authors join us on their own time, and what makes it workable for authors to do events is to sell their books. This is how they eat. This is how they pay their rent. So please help our authors, Mary Dixie Carter and Aggie Blum Thompson, pay their rent and their bills today. If you like this conversation, show them some love by buying a book. Again, the links are in the chat box. Additionally, if you have any questions, please post those in the chat box. We will have questions and answers at the end of their conversation. Weller Bookworks is an independent bookstore founded in 1929. We have been owned and operated by the Weller family for nigh on 93 years now. In fact, almost exactly 93 years now. It is due to the love and involvement of our community that we have been able to operate and flourish over those years. Thank you to the world for that. And thank you for supporting us with your book purchases as well, because again, the way I pay my staff is when you buy books from us. Oh, it's capitalism, y'all. Everybody loves it when you buy a book. I'm just going to get us started and with some introductions. Mary Dixie Carter is joining us today. Her writing has appeared in Time, The Economist, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Chicago Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Sun, the New York Observer, and other print and online publications. A lot of journalism there. She worked at the Observer for 5 years, where she served as the publishing director. In addition to writing, she also has a background as a professional actor. Mary Dixie graduated from Harvard College with an honors degree in English literature and holds an MFA in creative writing from the New School. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 young children. Aggie Blum Thompson has worked also as a newspaper reporter, covering cops, courts, and trials with a healthy dose of the mundane mixed in. Oh, there's nothing like the crime desk, is there? Her writing has appeared in newspapers such as the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. A native New Yorker, she now lives just over the Washington, D.C. line in Bethesda, Maryland, with her husband, 2 children, cat, and dog. All the Dirty Secrets is her second novel. And with that, I'm going to disappear and allow Mary Dixie and Aggie to begin talking, because that's why we're here today. Welcome, both of you.
So pleased to be here. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. This is a great thrill. Maybe I can start. Is that okay? Mary
Wonderful.
Dixie.
Yes.
Great. Well, you know, I'm like many thriller writers. I'm an avid thriller reader, which is probably how you get into thriller writing. And last year, I heard about a book called The Photographer because everybody was buzzing about it. It was a June 2021 Indie Next pick. It was a Publishers Weekly Best Mystery Thriller of 2021. It was a USA Today, one of 5 books not to miss. It was on all kinds of lists: Frolic, Bookish, She Reads, Miss Career Girl, Publishers Weekly, Book Reporter, Library Journal. It went on and on and on. So I did what any thriller lover does, and I went to the bookstore. Yeah, and well deserved. You know, sometimes you can be a little disappointed when you get a really buzzy book, and this was not disappointing at all. I loved it, and I wondered maybe if you could just give us, the sort of Reader's Digest back blurb. What is The Photographer about?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for saying all those kinds of things. Delta Dawn is the photographer. She takes pictures of wealthy New Yorkers and their children. And at the opening of the book, she goes to the home of Amelia and Fritz Stroud to photograph their daughter's birthday party. And she falls in love with this family, and she becomes obsessed with this particular family. I got the idea for this book when I hired a photographer myself to take pictures of my children, my 2 children, my own 2 children. And when the pictures came back, they were really beautiful, but the children's eyes were cobalt blue, and they're not in real life. And I said to the photographer, I'd like for the children's eyes to be their real color. And she said, there is no real color. And I was struck by that statement and that point of view. And so I wrote a book from that point of view. Delta Dawn believes there is no real color and there is no real anything. And she can make the world what she wants it to be, what she thinks it ought to be.
Now, before we get further into Delta Dawn, let's just parenthetically talk about you for a minute. So you're Mary Dixie Carter. That sounds like a Southern name. You're living in Brooklyn. You're writing about an outsider.
Yes.
How much of your experience informed Delta Dawn, who is an outsider to Brooklyn, both because she grew up in Florida and because she's not culturally a New Yorker? So did you have some special insight into that from your childhood?
Well, thank you for asking that question. In a sense, maybe yes. So I have this very Southern name, an unusual name in Brooklyn or in Los Angeles, which is also where I lived growing up. And it is, a little odd, and people take note of the name. And so Delta Dawn, there's a parallel in that Delta Dawn has this odd name. And I think I chose the name Delta Dawn for several reasons, but one of them is because I did want that, like, she doesn't quite belong. She doesn't quite fit in. And it's one of many things that makes her feel as though she is an outsider. I think that everyone feels like an outsider at certain times in their life. And it's something I'm really interested in. And sometimes people feel like an outsider, even when the circumstances don't necessarily dictate that they should, or you wouldn't necessarily view the person as an outsider, but they might carry it with them. I think Delta does carry that with her. She could get past her background because she's talented, she's got a lot, she's successful at what she does, she's very good at what she does, she's attractive, she could get past her background, but she can't let go of the feeling that she's an outsider. I also just wanted to bring in that this outsider question also comes up in All the Dirty Secrets, and it's handled really beautifully and with a lot of nuance. And I recognized that. I mean, our books are extremely different, but I recognized that as, I guess, a similar theme that is appearing in both.
Right.
Is that something that you were?
Very much so. I'm always interested in the person who's part of the group but doesn't feel part of the group.
Yes, that's
party,
exactly what I'm interested in too. The person that is part of the group but doesn't quite belong in a full sense, and is always kind of has a slight distance. And the photographer and the camera, it's almost a perfect way to express that little bit of distance.
And I don't think that you're completely off there. I'm not maligning photographers. I've known many wonderful photographers, but many of them are people who have felt comfortable walking into a scene or being around people because they have the camera, because the camera is a kind of armor, right?
Oh, interesting.
I mean, it gives Delta Dawn a reason to butt into people's lives. It gives her a reason to.
Yeah, and it's like they don't need to interact with someone because they've got the camera, and the camera is the thing that's kind of interacting in a way, and they can be there and see what's going on. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting. I mean, and I guess writers are similar in certain ways to photographers in that we're watching, noticing, but there's not this physical object in front of us that's, maybe makes it easier, actually.
I don't want to spoil your book at all, but I don't think this will spoil it if I ask you, do you consider Delta Dawn an unreliable narrator?
Yes, I consider her an unreliable narrator. but I'm gonna like expand on it a little bit because she's an unreliable narrator, but I think she believes her own story. That once she's articulated her story to herself or to others, I think she buys it completely. In the moments that she's talking about something, whether she's like in a scene talking with other characters, or whether she's just in her own internal monologue, I think she's convinced herself. Like there's several things from her past that she mentions in her internal monologue, and I think she's convinced herself of the truth of her sort of narrative.
Right. So one of the things I was interested in about this book, reading it, last year we were still just coming out of the pandemic. There's been a lot of talk of sort of, all kinds of things going on in our culture, the widening gap between haves and have-nots, and reading it through that lens, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, Delta is a have-not, and she has access to the haves, right? Because she works as a service person, essentially, to very wealthy people.
Right.
So she's going into their world, but at least for part of the book, she's living in very different circumstances than the people she's photographing. So she has to seamlessly enter that world, but she's not of that world, and she doesn't belong in that world. And this is a big issue for her, right? I mean, this is a major preoccupation of hers.
It's a major preoccupation. So she grew up at Disney World. Her parents were janitors at Disney World. So she was watching what was going on, not participating. And that, and she felt as though she does not have the education, she does not have the upbringing, she does not have the trappings of everything that goes with this world. And so there's something special about the Straub family. They're not just, we were talking about this before, they're not just affluent. It's like they're affluent and they're glamorous and they're cool, in her mind. It's like they're cool, they're very educated. They have this stunning house in Brooklyn that's like a work of art, and she, like, all these things that she wishes she was, it's like they embody it. Everything that she wishes she was, it's like, oh, if I was part of this, I would be the happiest person ever. If I was only part of this. And so there are some real ways in which she is disadvantaged, but there are also some ways in which it's like a self-fulfilling thing that she brings that outsider feeling with her wherever she goes. And she can't just enjoy this relationship with the Straubs. She's going to push it one step too far.
Yes, I was saying to you earlier that she reminded me a little of Tom Ripley, Patricia Highsmith's fantastic protagonist in her novels. Someone who, in a way, it's not just that they had a different kind of upbringing, they have a sense of entitlement, and they're going to learn the ways of the class or the culture they want to belong in, and they
I think you just, Aggie, I think I missed what you just said because you froze for a moment.
Sorry, have you got me now?
Now I can, like, your image is frozen, but no, now I think it's better.
Okay, I was just saying that that Tom Ripley not only feels that he wants to enter this other milieu, this other class, but that he's entitled to. And I
Right.
got that feeling from Delta Dawn too, right? And that she was
Yes,
willing to do whatever it took to get there with very little compunction.
right. Yes. So I think she has this weird mixture of low self-esteem and entitlement, or almost kind of this arrogance, entitlement mixed with, I don't know if you almost call it self-hatred. And I think sometimes those things do go together weirdly. Like there's a narcissism in Delta.
Yeah.
And she believes she
Yeah.
believes that, you know, that she should have this kind of life, that she has all the qualities necessary to have this kind of life that she sees in front of her. And why doesn't she have this life?
Yes,
Like,
it's a very childlike view that what's just, it's just to have this, I deserve this, I do these things. It's a very childish take on how wealth is actually, or whatever, good luck, good fortune is actually distributed in the world.
Right. Yes. And a chip on her shoulder. Like,
And I don't want to give anything away, but I do want to say that the flip side is she has a tremendous insight and passion, which Tom Ripley doesn't, towards the young girl in this book, Natalie. And there's an authentic relationship there. There's an authenticity there, you know, that is not apparent in other relationships in the book. Let's put it that way, right? So there's something redeeming about Delta Dawn. She's not a monster.
Well, thank you for saying that, because that's exactly what I want and hope for the reader to feel like, oh, she has a heart. I mean, she loves this child. She really does. Has many limitations, many limitations, but you can see that some of the intentions aren't necessarily bad. I don't know that all of her bad behavior comes from, I don't think it comes from a bad place. And I hope the reader, you know, as horrifying as her behavior is able to connect with her, as you point out, because of the relationship with Natalie, and because of the outsider feeling that she has, which would make you feel hopefully empathy for her. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. And I think that Natalie really helps make her humanize her.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, going back to your novel, the person that is that appears to be fitting in but doesn't totally belong. Could you say a few more sentences about that? Like, I'd love to hear why that interests you, or how you chose to write about it, because it's also what interests me.
So in my book, there's a private school, which I made up, called Washington Prep, and it's an elite private school. And the main character went there as a student and is now working there. And her daughter goes there now, but her daughter does not like it and doesn't fit in there. And the mom is kind of ride or die. And, you know, I myself did go to a private school for 2 years. So I'm in New England, a boarding school. And so I have a little insight in what it's like to come into one of these schools. And I just think it's a really interesting dynamic. And I really love the dynamic of a kind of closed community with its own culture and real hardcore boosters, and then someone who's just not with the program. Her daughter's just not with the program. She just does want to be part of this private school, and her mother cannot understand why. I mean, by the end of the book, she understands why. It's a murder mystery. So, but yeah, that's a dynamic that's very interesting to me too, that everything looks okay from the outside, but then behind the facade, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, yeah.
Let me ask you a question. This is your first published novel.
Yes.
Is it the first novel you wrote?
No, it's not the first novel that I wrote. I read, I think in your bio or maybe on your website, we have that in common. I wrote a novel when I was pregnant with my daughter, my first child. And it was, you know, I had worked at the New York Observer, and I was actually there around the time that it was sold. So my novel is fictional, but it did have a lot to do with that newspaper. It had to do with, it's a different newspaper, but I understood the situation of a newspaper being sold and like the power struggles that sort of reveal themselves during that whole process. So I wrote that. I did get an agent. I did, you know, we sent it around. People said very nice things about it, but they did not buy it. And then I revised it because, you know, it was like, oh, this editor said this was different, perhaps, this was different, perhaps. And I worked on the revision for a little while, and I finally understood that it was not the best use of my time to like go over that book and try to turn it into something other than what it already was, and that I should start something else. And so I started The Photographer. You know, when that happened, the Children's Eyes comment, the photographer, the real life photographer, and I wrote some pages, like a few notes about that person that says there is no real color.
You had Delta Dawn first.
Sorry?
You had Delta Dawn first when you started the novel. She was the...
Yes, I had it, but her name wasn't Delta Dawn back then. It was actually, funnily enough, her name was Zoe for a while. I mean, her name actually changed a bunch of different times, but
yeah.
Finally I settled on Delta Dawn. But the first thing I had, yes, was that character. And when I put aside my novel, that the sort of newspaper related novel, I went to my computer and I looked through different notes I had and different scenes, and I came back to the story of the photographer, which was still really like fascinating to me. And then I wrote The Photographer. And I feel extremely blessed because this, you know, it didn't happen with the first novel. So getting it published was like, I fully understood like how fortunate I was with my literary agent, how fortunate I was with a wonderful publisher, and I still feel that way, like incredibly fortunate. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to your first novel?
Yeah, I mean, my story is like the little engine that could. So I wrote my first novel right after I graduated college. I was bartending in New York. I wrote a rom-com in the 90s, very 90s. It's really fun. I got an agent. She sent it around. I got really close a couple of times. I remember one particular editor in her leopard print coat in the 90s and a red lipstick. I thought she was so amazing. And in the end, no, it wasn't going to work. And I just was shocked. I didn't have like a plan B. I was waitressing and bartending. I was like 25 or 26. And that's when I became a newspaper reporter, and I became a cops reporter. My first job was in the South in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's like a sitcom in itself, like Jewish girl from Long Island goes down to the deep South and covers law enforcement. It was great. I loved it. And then I wrote another novel, and the same thing happened. And I got married, and I had kids, and we moved to France for a while, and we were living in Paris, came back to America and working at a newspaper here when I wrote a third novel. And this novel was an international thriller called The Diplomat. And it was about a female diplomat. And again, got an agent, got really good response, but no one would buy it. And I heard that women don't read international thrillers and men don't read thrillers with female protagonists.
Oh,
And I was
God,
told, yeah, and I was
that's
told, send us
horrible.
domestic.
That's horrible.
Yeah. So I said, do you have any domestic thrillers? And so I said, okay. And I love domestic thrillers. So I sat down and I wrote my first book, which was I Don't Forgive You. And I got, agents, and that's what happened. That was my book that got published. So that was the fourth book I wrote.
And
So
are
all the
you,
different- yeah.
people ask me this, and I'm curious about you. Are you gonna go back to any of those novels and revisit them and see if you can get them published?
I seriously doubt it. I tend to be very forward moving and forward thinking. I mean, I have so many ideas. And if I'm completely honest, it's the writing I like more than the publishing.
Yeah.
I want to write more things. I have a lot of things I want to write. So
Yeah.
that didn't get published. I mean, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's fine. I have other things to write. What about you?
Yeah, I don't give that exact answer, but my sentiment is sort of the same. It's like, I don't really care to go back to that book. I don't really have it in me to revise it at this point. I don't even want to revise it because I feel like it is what it is.
Right.
Maybe if someone did want to publish it as it is, then I suppose I'd be happy with that, but I'd rather move on. I'd rather move forward and not look backward to that. Yeah.
And I really do think that writers are better for the books that didn't get published. It's not a failure. It's
Right.
It's practice. And if it
Totally.
didn't get published, there's probably a reason, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is on a different scale, but one thing about when I'm working on my novel photographer or my next novel that I'm working on is I tell myself that I have to write bad pages before I write good pages. It's just that's the way it goes, is you have to write something like for my process, the way I can get to the good pages is to write some bad pages and just recognize that that's gonna be put aside. And so, you could make the argument, same's true of a novel, except you need to write a whole novel, get it out of your system, and then move on.
I've just become much more kind of fatalistic about these things as I've gotten older. Like, I don't fight things as much anymore. If it's right, it'll work, it'll happen, but you have to keep moving forward in life.
That's a really good attitude. I try for that attitude. I don't know if I always achieve it, but yeah, don't dwell on the things that didn't turn out. Yeah.
I mean, I think I have so many, I don't know about you, but I have such a long list of ideas. If I didn't have that long list, then I might be tempted to go back.
Right.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have a lot of ideas? Do you have a notebook or a folder where you keep ideas?
I have, on my computer, I have a lot of different ideas. Some of them have taken the form of a short story. There's a couple of different short stories that I sometimes think, should that be my next novel? And I don't really know. And but I didn't in working on the book that I'm working on right now. There is one key part of it that was an idea from a few years ago. It isn't like I understood the whole story or the whole setting or anything like that. But there's one key dynamic that comes from this short story. And so I think, when I am going through files and looking what is the thing that I want to work on now, there's usually one document that pushes me in a direction. And I may not end up using those exact words anywhere, but it could be like just a concept that I take and run with.
So I think this is a really interesting subject because, I'm often asked, as you probably are, where do you get your ideas, right? And ideas are everywhere. To me, the interesting question is, what makes an idea a novel, right?
Oh, yeah.
You get lots of little ideas, like you said, good for a short story, good for a scene, interesting. But how do you know when it's enough to make it for the whole marathon? When do you know it's going to make it 90,000 words?
How do you know? Honestly, I don't have an answer for that. With a photographer, I felt like having written the first novel called It Sparkles as It Burns, and there wasn't really, when I thought about It Sparkles as It Burns, there wasn't really a way to describe it to someone in one paragraph. It was really about these relationships, and it wasn't like something that you could sum up in a few sentences. With a photographer, I felt like just in terms of being able to maybe get an agent, being able to get it published, I felt like there was an idea there that was easier to express. With a book that I'm working on now, I don't know how it's clear to me whether it's a novel or not, but I did, one way is I sent some pages to my agent, and she was excited about it, and so that gave me a boost of confidence that I was going in a good direction. But how do you know? I don't have a great answer.
Well, I don't get started until I have a sense of the ending.
Oh, really? Okay.
I won't even start to write a single word until I, in my mind, have a sense of the arc and how it's going to end. I don't plan it out in the sense that I'm plotting every chapter, but I need to know sort of what the discovery is, what the big kind of, reveal is, what the twist is, what's the lesson learned. Like I need to know the emotional arc of the book, right? And once I know that, then I can get started. But if I can't get to there from my beginning, like if I have a story, like, I have a million things like, oh, woman finds a locket at a yard sale and it turns out to be a girl who was murdered years ago. Such a good beginning, right? Okay, well, what does chapter 2 look like? And how does that end? How does that end? And if I can't give myself a satisfying answer, I don't get going on it. Right.
So that's your main criteria, is like you need to be able to have a clear ending in mind.
Yes.
But you don't outline your books, or do you?
No.
I don't outline either.
But I know that I want that necklace to have turned out to belong to not the murdered girl, but somebody else. Everyone thought it was the murdered girl. Like I'd have to figure out what the thing is.
Right.
And then I can keep going. But if I don't know what the mystery is, then I can't start and discover it along the way,
Right.
But what about your process? I think I'm always interested in writers' very literal process. Are you someone who writes every day?
I try to write every day. I definitely don't write on Saturdays and Sundays because I tend to write when the children are, off at school and doing their activities. Saturdays and Sundays, usually I'm with my husband and the children, we're all kind of together. Other than that, I try to write every day. It doesn't always happen, but I really do try to write every day. And I try to make myself kind of sit at the computer and and I'm just going to sit there at the computer for whatever amount of time I've kind of designated and try to do something. try to write something. And I try really hard not to judge what I'm writing. So what I've said before about like, I write a lot of bad pages and sort of accept that as a necessary route to write good pages. That
I think
like
it's
if
what
I,
Annie Lamott called the shitty first draft.
yes, exactly. Or not even, I mean, it isn't, some of it doesn't even make it into the first draft.
Right.
Like if I, at one given sitting, if I'm gonna write 2 pages that I actually use, even to get to those 2 pages, I might write 4 pages that are like nothing, like that literally get deleted and thrown out like immediately.
So do you edit as you're going, or do you let all that stay in there and then when you get to the end, you go back?
I try to edit out the things that are obvious, like the things where it was like, oh, this whole thing is just like, I edit out the obvious sections. And then I try to kind of keep a little bit of forward momentum because it's easier, like psychologically, to feel like I'm moving forward. But then almost to like maintain some kind of discipline about like, what is this story that I'm telling? At certain junctures along the way, I need to like strip away all these other tangential directions and delete those things so that I can see the story. Mainly just for my own like clarity of like what direction is this story going, and am I actually telling it?
It sounds like you are not a plotter.
I'm not a plotter. No, I'm not.
Outliner.
I might, maybe like when I'm 50% of the way through, I might think to myself, what are the things that kind of need to happen to make this arc work?
Totally.
So I might like say to myself, what are the scenes that I need to have happen? And I might jot those down, like these are scenes that I need. And then, when I was done with the photographer, so now I'm going back to the photographer. My process for the book I'm working on now is a little bit different. When I go back to the photographer, I had a full draft, and it was way too lean because it didn't develop a lot of different things that it needed to develop. So when I read it through, then I could say to myself, okay, I need a scene here that does X, Y, and Z. I need a scene here that develops this relationship. I need a scene here that, sort of foreshadows the possibility that da-da-da-da. So like, and I'll make that little list. And then, that's after having a draft. I'll make that list and then go through and like, it's like a checklist. Okay, I'm gonna write this scene, write this scene. What about you?
I was gonna say, I'm what I call an underwriter, like you are. And most people are overwriters. Most people write too much and have to cut. I'm an underwriter. My first draft is skinny and spare, and I need to it's like a skeleton, and I need to hang the flesh on it and the skin on it and the hair on it.
Totally.
And I think here's what I'm positing, just like extemporaneously, that comes from being a newspaper reporter, from being a journalist, is writing.
Maybe it does.
And writing really succinctly, and just getting the information in there, and then taking that breath and being like, okay, now I'm going to go back and add in everything that makes it fiction, really.
Right. Yeah. And there's almost to me, there's almost an urgency to let me find this story. Like, what is this story? Let me find the arc of the story. So instead of outlining, which others might do to find the story, I write this really lean draft, just like you're saying. And then once I've found the arc, then I go back and fill it in.
I almost can't relax into the story until I've written that
Totally.
first lean draft.
That's exactly how I feel. That's
Yeah.
exactly how I feel. Like, it feels like there's an urgency to climb this mountain.
Right.
And it's like pushing something very heavy up. And I need to like get that over with. And then I can do the
The
real
fun part. Yeah.
the fun
Totally.
part, the like
Yeah.
the real writing, which is like
Yeah. But you know, that's not how everybody writes.
I know. I mean,
Yeah.
some people like spend tons of time, you know, on the words of their page
Description,
one.
metaphor, and yeah, I had a girlfriend who showed me a rough draft of something, and it was so beautifully written, but there wasn't a line of dialogue in the entire novel. You know,
That's so interesting.
people really write differently. Let me ask you, you said that you were writing slightly differently for the second novel. What did you mean by that?
Well, the photographer had a lot of challenges, but one thing that was more straightforward about the photographer is this like unity of time and place. Like, it's in this one house, really everything takes place practically in this one house. It's
One
a small
perspective.
cast.
Yeah.
What?
One perspective.
One perspective, one house, one, you know, a small cast of characters, and the kind of process of staying in this woman's head and allowing her voice to kind of speak to me. For this particular novel, for the photographer, it worked really well. Like, I'm gonna let her tell me what she does next, and I'm not going to impose it on her. I want to be surprised as much as anyone else. For the book that I'm writing now is a little bit different because the cast of characters is a little wider. Like, there's more characters. There's also relevant backstory. And with the photographer, the backstory is important, but it really was not. I couldn't dwell on the backstory for her.
You did it.
Because
No, you didn't. You hinted, but you never went. You never went.
I never went into it because she hates her backstory. Delta Dawn hates her backstory, so she wouldn't think about it. And if she doesn't think about it, it doesn't make sense for me to write a chapter about it because she's choosing to shut that out. And so the reader doesn't get it. And so I would like maybe little pieces of it would reveal themselves along the way, almost against her will. She would, this was my intention anyway, against her will, she would think of something would come to her, like a thought about her childhood, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then she'd like push it away.
Well, if you ever want to write like a novella about Delta Dawn's childhood and adolescence, I would read it.
Oh, I would too. I'm gonna just pop in here because I did have people actually email a couple of questions to us prior to this event that I want to ask you all as part of our question and answer period here. So I'm just going to use that as my segue. One of them was this question that I think you both have answered in your discussion about process in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to modify it slightly from the question, which was what advice do you have for aspiring authors to? You both addressed your journeys to being published authors. How do you keep going in the face of rejection?
Well, I would say, as someone who has had a lot of rejection, that the rejection doesn't stop just because you become a published author. There's more rejection. Right? So you have to make friends with it. You just have to make room in your house and be like a smelly old dog or something. Like that's just part and parcel of the writer's life. It's never going to not be there unless you're, you're printing on a zine like in the 90s and distributing it to your friends and family. If you're going to go out there in the world and be part of the publishing industry, there's going to be so much rejection, and just learning to not take it personally, because it's not personal. There's always someone who's on a list you're not on, or getting a movie deal and you're not, or, getting a coverage at a bookstore you're not getting. Or you're not getting the editor you want, or the treatment that you want, or you're not able to sell your third book. It's just, it's on and on and on, and you have to make peace with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's part of it's just part of the process. And it's, there is something satisfying about getting your first novel published, and you think like that it's all going to be, everything's going to be okay. But there's the next challenge and the next challenge, and you have to be willing to live with that kind of those rejections and those failures. I had a conversation recently with a friend who was really not about writing or publishing, but it was about raising kids, and one of the most important things that you could teach a child is failure, and being able to fail, and that is not affect one's self-esteem, which that's much easier said than done. To have, not have the failure affect your self-esteem or your self-confidence.
But if you really do look at it as part of the process, there can be no success without failure, right?
Yeah.
And the higher you go, the bigger the failures are going to be. That's way
true.
It's built in that way. And if you're not failing, it means you're not taking a risk, right? It's just like with running or something. If you're a competitive runner, if you're not beating your time, then you're not trying, right? To fail means to have tried. And so I would just, it's a reframe, and it takes radical acceptance. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it is necessary to somehow make peace with rejection and failure.
Yeah. That is good advice. I like that. The other question that I was emailed, I think it's just fascinating. She said, I think researching a book would be more fun than writing it. Your books are both set in wealthy environments. Was researching it actually fun, and how did you do that research?
You want to answer that, Aggie?
Yeah, for me, it was so much fun. So my book centers on a thing called Beach Week, which is a tradition out here in DC, where teenagers, when they graduate high school, head to the beach for a full week to stay in houses rented by their parents, to drink alcohol bought by their parents, to be unsupervised and just party. And I'm from New York, and I'd never heard of that. And I just thought that was like the most amazing thing ever. So of course I was like, I have to go out to Beach Week. I have to go to the shore and research this. I have to go to these bars, and yeah, so I think research is a lot of fun. I agree with your email correspondent. I would say that, at some point you have to pull the plug on the research and actually sit down and write. But yes, research is tons of fun.
What about you, Mary Dixie?
Well, before I answer the question, I just want to tell everyone that All the Dirty Secrets is riveting. And if you have not read it, you should read it immediately. It's amazing. As far as research goes, I did enjoy my research. I took a photography class, which was fun. I took a class in Photoshop, which was also fun. I cannot say that I became a good photographer from those classes, but I did develop the vocabulary, or some vocabulary, to talk about photography a little bit. And then I sent my book to a couple of friends who were photographers to ask them to look it over. Research can suck you in, because also you can do research, putting aside, the photography class that I took. There's endless amounts of research you can do online. So if you sit down to write and you decide you're going to research one, you can't remember the name of something that you want to include in your book or whatever, and you decide to go research that, you could spend 2 hours off on that tangent of researching that one thing. And it's important, but it also is like, there's a sometimes hard balance of figuring out, like, okay, am I best served to research that right now? Or should I just put a, TK, like, should I just put a placeholder there and move on? And then there's another day that's,
Right.
only about research.
A portion of my book, it's dual timeline, takes place in 1994. And I have to admit, there were many hours I spent just Googling music, TV.
It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the fun things that I did to research the photographer was, so Amelia and Fritz are architects, and they're these very successful architects. So I needed their home to be really something magnificent. So I walked around Brooklyn and looked for the house that was their house. And then, so I finally found it. I was like, okay, that's it. But, I couldn't go inside that house. So I went online and, you can find tons of photos of gorgeous houses online. I could have spent, so many hours finding the perfect, and I did spend a lot of hours on this, finding what I thought was their home or something very close to it. And then, I had to tweak it because it was like, well, this has the perfect staircase, but it doesn't have the perfect kitchen. So I'm going to combine this staircase.
We are cut from the same cloth. I go on Redfin and I look in these huge wealthy homes, and I use that for get descriptions for my books of what homes are like. Yeah,
totally.
Everything's online now. People hire homes down to their details of their kitchens, their cabinets. Yeah,
totally. And then it's also really important, because if you have your character walking from one room into another room, you really want to be like very grounded and like, so what, how far is that from the kitchen to the living room? Like, how many steps does it take to get from the kitchen to the living room? Or, they're looking out the window. What are they seeing when they look out the window? Those things are important to the reader, but maybe even more important, just so we as writers can feel like I'm really there and like feel some authenticity about what's happening.
Oh, all of the detail in both of your books really demonstrates the research that you both did. And I'm just going to kind of amplify and pivot off of something Mary Dixie Carter said, and that is that All the Dirty Secrets and The Photographer are great books. We're in the dog days of summer. We were talking about this at the very beginning as we were getting to know one another before we went live. This is the perfect time to pick up one of those books and delve in and have a great wild ride with delusion and aspiration and appearances and how they're not what they always seem. So please do support our authors today, Mary Dixie Carter, author of The Photographer, and Aggie Blum Thompson, author of All the Dirty Secrets, because we want to keep them writing. I hope we get to see more from you soon.
Yes, Mary Dixie, what are you working on now?
I'm working on a novel that is tentatively titled Marguerite by the Lake. And there's a power struggle between two women. There's an outsider situation in this book too. What about you? What are you
But
working
is
on?
your book, is it in Brooklyn again, or if you?
No, it's
Yeah.
not in Brooklyn. It's by a lake.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Have to go to a lake then. My next book is called Such a Lovely Family. And it's basically like Knives Out at a DC garden party, cherry blossom festival, murder, wealthy
Oh.
family. Who could have done that,
Oh, that sounds fabulous.
Yeah, so see, here is a reason to keep watching these two women. They are amazing writers with great ideas. I'd like to thank you both so much for joining us today. This was such a pleasure to host. Your conversation was intriguing and exciting, and I can hardly wait for those next books. Weller Bookworks customers, please do remember, like, share, do all of those good things for Weller Bookworks, and do that for these authors as well. I'd like to thank everybody today for having joined us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you very much and have a great day.